Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Monday, January 29th, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, the latest from the Middle East, where 3 U.S. service members have been killed. Plus a look at Trump's support among rural voters, and gray divorce is on the rise. 3 U.S. service members were killed and dozens injured yesterday in a drone attack by Iran-backed militants. The incident happened at a U.S. base along the Jordan-Syria border. President Joe Biden issued a statement calling the 3 patriots in the highest sense and that the nation is grieving. Biden said, quote, "Have no doubt we will hold all those responsible to account at a time and in a manner of our choosing," unquote. These are the first U.S. troops killed by enemy fire in the Middle East since October 7th, when militants attacked Israel, killing some 1,200 people while taking hostages. Since then, Israel has killed more than 26,000 Palestinians during its Gaza offensive. The Pentagon says that Iran-backed militias have launched more than 150 attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria since October 17th, 10 days after the Israel-Hamas war broke out. Meanwhile, talks intensified yesterday on a potential agreement that could see Israel pause military operations against Hamas for 2 months in exchange for the release of more than 100 remaining hostages, according to multiple media reports. You can stay up on all the latest from the war and increased tensions across the region with usatoday.com. With a possible rematch looming, rural voters heavily favor former President Donald Trump over President Joe Biden, according to a Colby College poll. My colleague Sarah Ganim sat down with USA Today national correspondent Terry Collins for more.
Terry, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So the theme of your story seems to be that many rural voters, even some lifelong Democrats, feel they're being ignored, that their issues don't matter. I think one quote was something to the effect of the flyover states are being looked over. Why do they feel this way?
Oh, thanks for the question. I think based on the research of 2 professors at Colby College and other entities such as the Rural Voter Initiative and the Rural Utah Project, there's been a long belief that concerns of rural voters on a large scale have been somewhat bypassed for many years compared to those in urban and suburban America. Some may think it's simply a numbers thing. That said, we've had some of the closest presidential elections in recent years, and it seems the rural vote is arguably more important than ever. What we're seeing in terms of the polls and research is that many rural voters tend to lean Republican and support former President Donald Trump, and that President Biden and his administration are just not in touch with their concerns and needs, especially post-pandemic.
So for months, I've been reading these stories that say that the economy is strong, that the numbers show that, yet Americans don't feel like it's strong. Is that what's happening in rural America as well?
Yeah. Based on what I'm hearing and seeing from rural residents and experts, including Isaac Wright, co-founder of the Rural Voter Initiative, 2 points. They don't see it, and therefore it doesn't have a direct effect on them right now at this time. Wright has also conducted a study that said rural voters appear to assess their economic circumstances through consumer prices rather than unemployment reports and economic statistics. Basically, in other words, rural voters can feel the pain based on their wallets, purses, bank accounts, and their gut.
It seems that the polling shows that it's not even really about Republican versus Democrat. It's just about support for Donald Trump. I saw that support for him is so strong among rural Americans that 92% even said that if Trump was convicted of a crime, it would not change their support for him. Why is that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I spoke to a resident who lives in rural Kentucky. She agreed with that statistic and clearly said she's not going to throw stones. She'd like to hear somebody in politics say, "I've never made a mistake." The person I talked to also said she thinks Trump can rise above his woes, doesn't think he's guilty or not guilty, and she just thinks Trump's good outweighs his bad.
One of the things I read in your story was that the current Biden administration has tried to do reach out to rural voters to show progress with his big infrastructure plan. Is that resonating at all?
No, not at this time. It doesn't appear to be. According to Kobe professors Nicholas Jacobs and Dan Shea, who conducted the poll, and also Isaac Wright at the aforementioned Rural Voter Initiative, all 3 told me that Biden, his administration, and his surrogates have a lot of work to do uh, to show and tell rural voters otherwise that it is going to have some effect and promise for them. Um, it's probably going to take some real examples and testimonials from actual rural Americans to prove otherwise.
Terry Collins, thanks so much for this reporting and for making the time to talk to me about it.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
President Joe Biden vowed to take immediate action to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border if Congress approves a proposal currently under negotiation in the Senate. He said the proposal would include new presidential authority to do so when the border becomes overwhelmed. He also said in a statement Friday that what's being negotiated in the Senate around the border would be, quote, the toughest and fairest set of reforms to secure the border we've ever had in our country, unquote. Biden's statement sought to save a border deal on the verge of collapse after Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell acknowledged privately to other Republican senators that opposition from former President Donald Trump puts the party in a dilemma. Trump reiterated his opposition in a Saturday social media post to Truth Social, writing that a bad border deal is far worse than no border deal. For his part, a bipartisan border deal would give Biden the chance to claim victory in addressing surging migration at the southern border, a topic that Republicans have hammered him on throughout his presidency. Residents in one small town are uniting to fight against a common enemy, a huge monkey farm. Local officials in Bainbridge, Georgia, a rural outpost about 20 miles north of the Florida Panhandle, recently approved a startup's plan to build one of the largest monkey breeding facilities in the country. At its capacity, the nearly $400 million complex would hold some 30,000 monkeys. That's double the city's human population. But a growing group of locals and animal rights activists is set on stopping the monkey breeding plan before construction begins. Concerns are wide-ranging. Some are worried about animal safety. Others fear property values will plummet, or they fear monkeys will escape or spread disease. They're also concerned the facility's waste may damage the environment. Still, the company behind the project, Safer Human Medicine, says the long-tailed macaques will be bred and sold to pharmaceutical companies, universities, and laboratories for medical research studies. Monkeys, because of their similarities to humans, have been essential to research for a wide variety of illnesses. Critics have said that using monkeys as research subjects is immoral, but the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine maintain that there are currently no alternatives that can fully replace non-human primates. You can read more about the fight in Bainbridge and the broader conversation with a link in today's show notes. So-called gray divorce rates are on the rise, but they're costly. I spoke with USA Today personal finance reporter Daniel Visé to learn more. Daniel, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for making the time.
Likewise, thank you.
So, Daniel, divorce rates are on the rise among older Americans in recent decades. What do the numbers say here?
The divorce rate has doubled in the last 3 decades, going back to 1990 for Americans over 55. And if you just look at people over 65, the divorce rate has tripled in those years. So a lot more gray divorces.
Yeah, and what's driving this gray divorce phenomenon?
The researchers who study it say there are a few reasons for it. One is our aging population. There are more older people. The baby boom is a huge group, and they're entering retirement years. They're in retirement years. People are staying healthier longer. I know we had a dip in the longevity rate with COVID, but generally speaking, more of us are staying healthier longer into our life. Couples also are marrying later. And then I would throw in maybe the idea that there seems to be this impulse to stick together until the last kid has left home, has left the nest. I don't know how much of a thing that was in the 1970s and 1980s, but I think nowadays a lot of older married people think that way.
Interesting stuff. So how are the financial factors, Daniel, more complicated for those who get divorced after, say, age 55? And what are some of the major financial hurdles folks face?
Well, you start with retirement. If you divorce at age 55 or 60, you are perilously close to retirement. And generally speaking, the divorce court will split those retirement assets so that it's equitably distributed between the two partners. Unquestionably, it means, both people will have that much less in their retirement kitty at the end of that. So you might wind up 5 years from retirement, and it just is not very much time to play catch up. This is profoundly different than it would be for somebody divorcing in their 20s or 30s when you have decades of work ahead of you. If you retire in your 60s, I don't care how much money you think you saved for retirement, you're going to have to refigure your retirement plan. That's a huge one. A second factor would be going back to work, because in a lot of gray divorces, not all, but a lot of them, there's one primary wage earner, one person with the big job, and the other person, again, if you're in your 50s or your 60s, might not have worked for 30 years or 25 years, might have not worked since the 90s. And that, again, is much, much different than a divorce where the partners are 30 or 35. So you might have somebody facing the prospect of returning to work for the first time in decades, or deciding not to do that, and then figuring out how to live on a much reduced budget if they don't ever return to work.
And Daniel, how are some of these issues that we're talking about around gray divorce especially true for women?
Well, the research shows, and this is heavy, but a man who has a gray divorce can expect his standard of living to decline by about 20%, which is a huge number. A woman, on average, will see her standard of living decline by 45%. And both partners in a gray divorce will see their overall wealth decline by about half. It's just very hard to claw your way back into prosperity after divorcing late in life. And women tend to fare worse after a gray divorce.
Wow. As always, Daniel Visé with some great personal finance insight when you're here on the show. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
The matchup for Super Bowl 58 is now set. In yesterday's AFC Championship game, last year's Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, held off the Baltimore Ravens 17-10 thanks to a strong defensive performance and a massive game from Travis Kelce. Then, in a much different game, the Detroit Lions, trying to get to their first Super Bowl ever, stormed out to a big halftime lead against the San Francisco 49ers. But they saw their 24-7 lead evaporate early in the second half, and they lost a thriller. Kansas City San Francisco will now be a rematch of the Super Bowl from 2020, which was played just weeks before coronavirus shut down the world. It's also Kansas City's fourth appearance in the big game in the last 5 years. You can read more from USA Today Sports. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. You can also always email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson, back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.